It is time for the NASCAR DFS strategy show right here on Awesemo.com. Of course, I am Jason Floyd. As always, here on the NASCAR show, I am joined by Race Sheets Phil, man. Phil, man, I know it's a little rainy afternoon here in Tampa, but how you doing, man?
Good. It is cloudy and rainy, just the same here in eastern Oklahoma. Hoping for the clouds to lift so I can start my mowing.
I actually, my front yard was just insane, and so I finally got my front yard done yesterday before it started raining. Man, it's every afternoon here in Tampa. 4 o'clock hits, like 4 to like 6 o'clock. It is rain central here. But yeah, man, excited to sit here and talk a little NASCAR DFS with you. Of course, if you do have any questions, any comments on tonight's race, be sure to hit those up right there in YouTube. We will get to those. But of course, always, Phil, I come up with some opening questions that I have for you just based on the articles that you have over at Awesemo.com. And, one of the things that really stuck out to me of something you said it's an odd week for research and analysis.
Right. Richmond really is an anomaly track. We don't have any other tracks on the NASCAR circuit that are 3/4 of a mile like Richmond is. So when it comes to finding a corollary track, you could think of Martinsville, but Martinsville itself is such a unique track. It's smaller too. It's half a mile, but I mean Martinsville is basically just a flat paper clip that the guys drive around. You could go up to our mile long tracks, which would be Phoenix and New Hampshire, and I think that's kind of the best thing for what we're looking at this week. But just purely shape and length, Richmond is all by itself. So when it comes to your research purposes, you're looking at these past Richmond races. Although you could look at this as a little bit of a wrench, or the fly in the ointment, because generally the second Richmond race that happens around this time has generally been to close out the end of the season. So we're a little bit past that. Plus, we didn't get our first Richmond race of the season because of COVID-19. So this is our first Richmond race. We don't have another Richmond race to compare it to. It kind of leaves us with a couple of holes that we have to fill in our process. But that's what we enjoy about this game.
I thought the other interesting thing that you had mentioned in your articles is, once again, I don't know why my computer does this, but we'll adjust that here in a second, is kind of the aspect of, in terms of with NFL DFS being back and what it's going to be like. I don't know if that's any better, Phil, but I don't know why my mixer does this to me every week. Right when we get started with the show, man. Hey, Phil, you got him? Check. Phil, I do not know why this happens every week when we do this show, but for some reason, I guess as I'm not that familiar with Windows machines, as it adjusts my audio at very weird moments.
God bless Bill Gates.
Yeah, no, I'm an Apple guy, man. I'm an Apple guy. I've got everything Apple, but in terms of producing, for whatever reason, I got to use a Windows machine. So yeah, man, I'm not. We'll have to figure that out exactly what is going on there. But getting back to the races, one of the other things that you wrote about was Dominators, and exactly how many do you roster, how many do you not roster?
Yeah, last week the big discussion, because we had a 367 lap race, was about Dominators, and we were looking at that 2 to 3 window. And up until the very end of the race, it was definitely a 2 Dominator race between Chase Elliott and Martin Truex Jr. And then Truex tried to move to take the lead that he thought would work out, and it ended up taking both him and Chase out. And then Kevin Harvick ended up winning a race that he had no business actually winning. This week, 400 laps. We're looking at a minimum of 2 Dominators in tournaments. You can move that line up to 3 for DraftKings. I don't think moving your line to 3 Dominators on FanDuel is optimal. And there will be some discussion about possibly a 4th Dominator. But if you look at these past races at Richmond where there has been a 4th Dominator, that 4th driver that's leading at least 10% or more of the laps, he's only leading about 45. So when you consider what that turns into for Dominator points, you're only talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20 points extra. And generally, if you've got a driver that's 10K, 11K, and you only give them 20 extra bonus points, a 65 point day is good, but it's probably not going to be optimal when you consider, fantasy points per $1,000.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things to think about there. Obviously, as we go on throughout this show, we got to bring up once again the Ricky Stenhouse Jr. pricing, as we talked about that last week. Again, the difference in between when we're talking about DraftKings or we're talking about FanDuel, and kind of looking at who do we want to have exposure to, maybe on one side as opposed to the other side. But of course, we do like to break this one down into tiers, and we're going to kick it off by talking about the tiers in terms of tier number 1, Denny Hamlin, Kevin Harvick, Martin Truex Jr., Chase Elliott, and Brad Keselowski. All these fighters are in the 11K and 10K range on DraftKings. Looking at Denny Hamlin, 11.6, Harvick, 11.3, Martin Truex Jr., 10.9, Elliott, 10.5, Keselowski, 10.1. Now, over on the FanDuel side of the things, Hamlin, 13.5, Harvick, 14K, Truex 13K, Chase Elliott 11.4K, and Brad is 12.5K. So kind of take it with these drivers of kind of what you're thinking here.
Okay, Denny, we know the script on Denny. Denny, short when it comes to these short tracks, he's been great all year. It was kind of surprising to see him not run so well last week, but the story with Darlington is that if you can't get to the lead, then you're probably just going to get stuck in traffic, and that was the problem with Denny. Denny is a multi-time previous winner here at Richmond, although you have to go back 4 years ago to find his last win here at Richmond. But I mean, everything else, these last 3 years, 3rd, 5th, 16th, 3rd, 5th, 3rd. Average running position of 9.6. So he always kind of finds his way towards the end, better than what he has been running. He's the only driver in the field in the last 3 years that has 5 top 5s. Everybody else below him has a maximum of 4. He's run really, really well here. The Dominator points kind of scare you, only averaging 18.5 fastest laps, 10.8 laps led per race. I think the thing with Denny is that you're kind of assured because of how well he's run in these day into night races, how well he's run at short tracks. Our corollary tracks are Phoenix and New Hampshire, based off of the tire package that Goodyear is running. And Denny held the lead for a good chunk of that race at New Hampshire. You kind of feel like you're getting at least assured a top 3 out of Hamlin, but the Dominator points I'm just really not too sure of. You go down below Hamlin to Harvick. He's our second highest priced driver here on DraftKings at 11.3. I feel like that's going to be the play that a lot of people are just going to slam in because Harvick is on the pole. But think about the last time that Harvick was on the pole with Joey Logano starting next to him. You have to go back to Kansas, obviously a different type of track, a different type of package. But what happened? Harvick immediately lost the lead on the very first lap to Logano, and Logano sailed off and knocked off a bunch of Dominator points. My worry with Harvick is, he's kind of like Hamlin has been at this track recently, where he's been good, but he's not been a driver that you would really consider a threat to win. Now in this 2020 season, Harvick's a threat to win every time that he starts. But my fear is with Harvick, when you consider all these different factors, how he ran well at Phoenix, but that was a product of him being on the front row. You go forward to New Hampshire, and he was just kind of there. You consider all these different things, and I think like if you're looking to just play tournaments, you're going to get your cash, games tomorrow in NFL. If you're just playing tournaments and you're just looking for a play to kind of set you apart from the field and get you differentiation, do what I'm doing. I am just completely 100% fading Kevin Harvick. I am not going to have him on a single lineup. I'm going to take the stance that either on the first lap or early on in the race that he's going to lose the lead to Logano. And yeah, he's going to hang around in the top 5, but he's never going to be a legitimate threat to actually lead laps.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions that we've already got in chat, this is from James, and this is in relation to Kevin Harvick, but also Denny Hamlin as well. He says, James says, seems like Harvick and Hamlin always in the top 3. Why?
If that's a question about salary, then I mean that's totally based upon what they've done this season, because you're talking about the guys that have the most wins, and DraftKings is always going to bake that into their prices. If the question is about why they're starting so close to the front, you have to look at the new way that DraftKings, that NASCAR is setting the grid, and so much of it is based upon what these drivers did the past week. So I mean, you've got Kevin Harvick, who won the race last week, and where is he starting this week? He's on the pole. And remember, for the rest of the playoffs, the drivers that are in the playoffs are always going to start towards the front. So right now during this first round, we've got 16 drivers in our playoff bubble, so they're always going to fill the first 16 slots, and then we go to the second round. It'll be the 12 drivers in the first 12 spots. So whether it be the starting grid, blame that on NASCAR. Whether that be salaries, then blame that on how good the guys have been.
Yeah, it's when I'm looking at these Dominators, and I know every week, I typically put my NASCAR lineup after we do this show together, and looking at those Dominators, last week I had a lot of Brad Keselowski. He's starting 9th here today. What's kind of your take on him at where he's starting at, where he could finish, and in relation to a salary?
Yeah, I really, really like Brad. I mean, I know it didn't work out last week, but I'm more than happy to go back to the well. It's still the same corollary about day into night races. What really catches my eye with Keselowski is he's run fairly well here at Richmond over the last 3 years. His worst finish is 11th, and he's got a second place, a fourth place in there too. But the thing that you really need to pay attention to is those corollary tracks. You look at Phoenix. He was leading after the second stage break. He led a bunch of laps, and he was in line to win the race before Joey Logano passed him, and he would have finished probably with a second or third place finish, but there was a late caution that came, and for some inexplicable reason, the two team decided to pit to get fresh tires, and they never made up all that space that they gave up. Then you fast forward to Loudon. Keselowski was the best car. I mean, it was hands down. He could drive past anybody. He could drive up to anybody. It didn't matter where on the track. He was so incredibly good. So when I think about those two corollary tracks, that just gets me so excited for what Keselowski could end up doing tonight.
Another comment we have, this comes from We the People. He says, Truex for all the money.
Oh, baby. I mean, if someone's going to make me take down the Reddick fathead off of The Office and put up a Truex poster, I mean, he is the play tonight, and it's almost stupid how good he's been here at Richmond. You look at his averages, best driver rating in the field over the last 3 years, 123.7. That's that is 11 or 12 points better than the next closest guy, which would be Kyle Busch. Averaging the most DraftKings points, You look at his Dominator points, 41.2 fastest laps per race, 129.5 laps led per race. In fact, over the last 5 races, Truex has led over 100 laps in each of those 5 races. His team, he himself, they know what to do to get themselves to the front. He's won the last 2 Richmond races in last year's package. He has just been so incredibly good. You get him with that 14th starting position, so it gives him extra place differential to help boost his score, to help give him a little bit of a floor. If you're playing cash tonight, I think that Truex has to be like the number 1 Dominator option that you throw in your lineups besides whatever else that you do.
Looking at our ownership, does the Truex Jr. ownership of 54% concern you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard pill to swallow when we're talking about ownership, knowing that half of the field basically has you matched with that one guy. But God, those numbers are so gaudy. I mean, they are just so incredible. Last week, different package, different track, but once again, it was a day and night race. And who was the driver that led the most laps? It was Truex.
Yeah, that's something. And of course, if you want to know those ownership projections that we have right over at Awesemo.com, you got to sign up for it. Awesemo Plus NASCAR Weekly Pass for $9.95. This gets you driver projections, ownership projections, and the top drivers. So there's never been a better time for NASCAR DFS. So sign up today. Go to Awesemo.com/join to sign up today. Let's move on to tier number 2. So as we look at the drivers that are in tier 2, so this is the drivers in the 9K and 8K range on DraftKings. So we've got Kyle Busch, Ryan Blaney, Joey Logano, Kurt Busch, Eric Jones, Jimmy Johnson, Eric Almirola, Clint Boyer, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Let's first off, let's just mention Stenhouse Jr. because obviously when I'm putting together my sheet of salaries, the difference in salaries from DraftKings and FanDuel sticks out to me. 8,100 on DK, but 6,500 on FanDuel.
Right, and Ricky has put us in a tough spot. Like if you're playing tournaments, then I think the obvious decision is just to get off of Stenhouse, whether FanDuel or DraftKings. Get off of that because, I mean, starting 23rd, it's not like he really has that much place differential to get after. You're not really going to consider Stenhouse a threat to win this race. All those years that he was at Roush Fenway, his best finish was 4th in the spring 2017 race, but then everything else, his best finish was the 13th. So kind of like that 13th to 15th is probably the ceiling for Stenhouse unless things get crazy. I have to say that in tournaments, like there are guys above him that I really like as solid pivots, like Almirola and Boyer, or you can even go down to Bowman, Di Benedetto, Byron. Like I think like if you're playing cash, then you probably just eat the chalk and go with it, especially now that this isn't like last week where we've got an Eric Jones that's near $10,000 that you feel like you just have to slam in there. But in tournaments, I think it makes a lot of sense to just either go up or go down and get off of Stenhouse, who I don't think really has that much access to a ceiling.
Looking at our ownership projections when it comes to this group, the 2 highest ownerships that we have in this group is Joey Logano and Kyle Busch. Break down for the listeners, these 2 guys, and of course, Kyle Busch at 9,800 and Joey Logano at 9,300 on DK.
Okay, let's talk with the most expensive guys. So we've got Kyle Busch, underpriced, 9,800, ran pretty well, but I mean that was something that we expected. It was the 3rd race of the season at Darlington, had those notes to go off of. He never really kind of got to the lead, but a top 5 finish. That's what we were kind of hoping for Kyle. And he got there. So this week, we've got a track that he doesn't have previous race notes for this year, no practice. But the big thing is because, NASCAR and their weird rules, 2 lug nuts were loose on Kyle's car at the end of the race. So what do? His crew chief gets ejected for this race. So now he's got somebody else filling in that role for him. I know Kyle has amazing track history here. His last 4 finishes have gone second, eighth, first. Besides Martin Truex, he's probably been the best driver here. But when you consider that, the no access to race notes, no previous driving time here, doesn't have his regular crew chief, which is going to hurt him even further. I think, whatever temptation you had to play Kyle in your lineups because he's underpriced, I would get off of that. Now that could easily backfire in my face, but so be it. Joey, I really like Joey. Like I like all of the Penske drivers tonight. I even like Di Benedetto because of his affiliation with Penske. Logano's won here before. He's ran here pretty well himself. Average finish of 5.8. And starting next to Harvick, what does our ownership say? Is Harvick or is it Logano that's going to be the higher owned?
Harvick.
Okay, yeah. I think that the jumping off point and going from Harvick to Logano,
it's substantial too. It's
substantial.
Yeah. Like 30% difference.
Yeah, I think playing that is a perfect example of playing these numbers, jumping off of Harvick, and not only because of the ownership, but I mean, good God, the salary. Not having to spend that extra nearly $2,000, allows you to not have to mingle with so many punts.
So what I will do, I'll just tell you, this is kind of an all sports, but I'll relate this to NASCAR. So what I'll do is I'll look at Alex's projections. I then take those projections, put it in the Fantasy Cruncher. Then I just run a dummy crunch. Let me just see what it spits out. And then so like Martin Truex Jr., we've got him at over 50% ownership. Okay, what does Fantasy Cruncher spit out? Now look I don't want to sit there and say, if it spits out Martin Truex Jr. at 75% of, say I'm putting in 150 lineups. Okay, I want to lower that number. So then that's why I go into exposures and so if you're an Awesemo member, you have Fantasy Cruncher in your account. That is something to do there is when you compare the ownership numbers and then start kind of figuring out and really using Fantasy Cruncher to figure out exactly, because look, if you want Martin Truex Jr. a lot and say you're playing 150 lineups, if you know the ownership is 50-ish%, why are you going to have him in 80% of your lineups?
Yeah.
That's about the best way I can put it.
Yeah. Just to get over the field, sometimes you don't have to go absolutely nuts.
Exactly. Looking at some of the ownership of guys in this category that are under 10%, let me kind of get some of your thoughts on these guys. You mentioned about Eric Jones a little bit. Almirola, we've got him under 5% ownership. Ryan Blaney's under that number as well. Kurt Busch is under that number. Ricky Stenhouse is under that number as well.
I want to like Blaney because of the Penske corollary here. In fact, this is one of the rare times I think you could roll out a true Penske stack where you could go Logano, Keselowski as your main dominators, add in Blaney as a guy that moves from 15th maybe to the top 5, picks up some fastest laps in the process, and then you play Matty D because of his affiliation with Wood Brothers, and he's 16th. Starting 16th at 7,500, so he's got some wiggle room there. The constant worry with Blaney is these day and night races. I mean, we were kind of worried about it last week, and probably even if you were going to try to take advantage of that low ownership that we were projecting, once you saw that he was going to have to start at the end of the rear of the field because he failed inspection, then you probably got off of him. But ultimately in the end, what happened? Blaney had a horrible night. And I mean, we could very well see that tonight. Jones is like cheaper version of Blaney. He's got a little bit better place differential, nearly $1,000 cheaper, and he's a guy that you could see sneak into the top 5. The guy I want to highlight, you've got both Almirola and Bowyer in the mid to low 8,000 range on DraftKings. These are guys that have run well in this tire package, run well here at Richmond, and could easily find their way into the top 5 and become a value at their price range, because all it takes is Jones and Johnson, really kind of not moving forward. Stenhouse finishing probably 17th to 18th. And if Almirola and Boyer can get you a top 5, then that's going to be really valuable.
A couple of questions in relation to these. Another one, Jimmy Johnson, another smash play. Would you agree?
Johnson has a few of these tracks. Dover has been a track like that, and Richmond the same, where his performance has kind of fallen off at these other tracks. But you look at what Jimmy has continued to do here at Richmond. He's still bringing home top 12s. In fact, over the last 3 years, he has no finish worse than 12th. Starting 18th, he gives you place differential. He's a guy that you could comfortably play in cash if you wanted to. And Jimmy's he's playing to finish out the season well in his final season. And if he has to use a little strategy to get himself to the lead and possibly compete for a win, definitely not out of the question.
Forrest goes, thoughts on Chase Elliott and Ryan Blaney in GPP on anticipated low ownerships. Both seem to be going overlooked quite a bit in the favor of the JGR cars this week.
Okay. We've discussed Blaney, want to love him, but don't know if we can wholeheartedly trust him. Chase is another one of these guys that, does well in the evening to night races. The fears that we had about Chase possibly losing the lead as the pole sitter, they were nowhere to be found. Now, once he lost the lead, that was another story, because Truex was just so much better than him. And if they don't wreck, then Chase has an amazing finish last week. Last year in the new 750 horsepower package, Chase was all right, 13th and 15th. But in the year before that, which is probably going to be the closer corollary to this race, 4th and 2nd. So you've got, there is definitely some upside there with Chase. And plus, starting 12th, he gives you some place differential to help boost that floor.
Before we get into the Tier 3 drivers, do want to let you know about a great promo we got going on right now at Awesemo.com. It's the NFL Kickoff Flash Sale. Use the promo code REDZONE and get Awesemo Plus NFL Weekly Pass for 50% off. That's $7.50 for 1 week of Awesemo Plus NFL. This gives you access to the Awesemo's player projections, ownership projections, top stacks, and so much more. This is a limited time offer. It's valid through September the 15th. So head over to awesemo.com/join to sign up today. Make sure you use that promo code REDZONE to take advantage of that deal when you're looking to get your lineups in for the start of NFL football. Started on Thursday night. And, of course, tomorrow it all kicks off at 1 o'clock Eastern time. I'll be obviously working the Buccaneers Radio Network broadcast. So we're at 4:30. So it'll be a nice long day for me, but great to have football back in our lives. But let's talk about the Tier 3 drivers, a bunch of drivers in this tier. As 7K and the 6K range drivers, we have Austin Dillon, Alex Bowman, Matt Diabeno, William Byron, Cole Custer, Christopher Bell, Bubba Wallace, Ryan Newman, Tyler Reddick, Matt Kenseth, John Hunter Nemechek, Ty Dillon, and Ryan Preece. I do know Jalen had asked a question about Bell or Reddick.
Okay, so this is the question of, do we want to save money or do we want more place differential upside? Because Bell is $7,200 starting 26, but Reddick is $300 cheaper, but he has four fewer positions to gain. So when it comes to a question like this, I think you have to ask yourself, who do I see having the higher upside out of these guys? If New Hampshire is our corollary, then good God, it's got to be Christopher Bell. You guys remember back in the days when Christopher Bell was nearly $10,000 or more every week. Bell started by 33rd, 35th, and instantly moved his way up into the top 5. And he was right in there all day until he got too aggressive, cut down a tire, and then he cut down another tire. However, Tyler Reddick, just the same, ran really well at both of those tracks. Quite frankly, I think you're not going to go wrong with either one. Like if it comes down to a 1v1 in your final cash game lineup, then you're probably taking Bell just because he has the 4 more spots to gain. But quite frankly, I think really they both kind of have the same ceiling this week. So I think the real question is, why aren't you just playing both of them?
That is a good question. Another question that we got here, I forget who asked about, but asked about William Byron. Starting in the 5 spot, 7,400 in DK, 9,100 on FanDuel.
Okay. Byron and Bowman, I'm going to add him to this conversation. They are basically the same driver this week. I mean, it is impeccable. If you go to the race sheets and you look at their short track history at Richmond, which would just be 4 races since they've been racing for Hendrick for 2 years, it's crazy how much these drivers, their numbers mirror each other. I mean, we're talking about everything from fantasy points to driver rating to average finish, average running position. It's crazy. And here they are. Bowman starts 4th. Byron starts 5th. These guys have way more downside than they have upside. But, this was a question that we had last week about these two, and they managed to kind of just hang around and finish where they started. I think for that reason, like, I would not play both of them in a lineup together. But, like, if you're afraid, if you're in this range and you've got you're possibly sitting at Christopher Bell or Bubba Wallace, and you're wanting to get away from ownership, and you're wanting to go up, but you don't want to play Matt DiBenedetto because you don't quite frankly trust him, then if you've got the money to get up to Bowman, then I might go up to Bowman. But if you only have the money to get up to Byron, great tournament play.
Looking at place differential, and I know this is something that you wrote about this week on Awesemo.com. Bubba Wallace at the starting 30th. What's your take on him in this race?
He's got so much potential. It's crazy. When you look at his last 2 years here at Richmond, 25th, 27th, but then in that fall race last year, 12th. So we've seen a little bit of a ceiling from Bubba. If we look and see what he's done in this package so far this year, albeit that it's only two races. Let me highlight them here. Okay, average finish of 21. So for cash, that's probably good. Mm-hmm. For tournaments, you're going to need better than 21st at 7,100. Could he sneak his way, around 15th? Sure. And he's kind of the big news getter right now for NASCAR, because it was announced that he's not going to come back to race for Richard Petty next year. So, if that narrative matters to you whatsoever, then go fly with it. But I think for cash, he's a great play. But for tournaments, you're gonna need like another career night out of Bubba.
Some other drivers we really haven't mentioned. How about Austin Dillon, who's starting 3rd?
I can't bring myself to do that play. I can paint the narrative with Bowman and Byron, but Dillon, God, you're going to need him to finish top 5 and pick up some fastest laps in the process, and I don't think you're going to get that out of Austin.
We have got similar ownership on 2 drivers, and they're both in this range, or essentially there's only a $200 difference between the 2. John Hunter Nemechek and Ty Dillon. Who's got the bigger upside?
I'm going to say Ty, and this is just based on I kind of worry about John Hunter. This is his first time that he's going to be at Richmond in a Cup car. He's been to Richmond plenty of other times in the Xfinity series, and I believe in the Truck Series as well. But this is the first time that he's going to see this track from behind the steering wheel of a Cup car. So I worry about him, his propensity to wreck, and what that's going to look like in his very first Cup Series race here. If we look and see what John Hunter has done in this package, yeah, it's just 2 races, but those were also his first 2 races in the Cup car in those races, and his average finish was 30.5. So I think just for the sake of safety, it's probably better going with Ty. Ty's average finish in this tire package, 18.5. So, perhaps there is a little bit of a ceiling to milk out of Ty Dillon this week.
In terms of, we'll move on to tier number 4 because we've actually got a couple of questions in relation to tier 4. And once again, looking at ownership, so we've got some high ownership for a couple of drivers in this one. Buscher's one of them. I know we got a question about him a little while ago on thoughts on him. Some other ones that have good ownership. Corey LaJoie is up there as well, and Michael McDowell.
Buscher, I've got him listed as a cash play if you're in this range, but quite frankly, I would rather spend up for one fewer spot to gain with Ryan Preece. Preece ran pretty stinking well in the New Hampshire race. Now, what Preece has done here at Richmond, 30th and 20th, not so great. But quite frankly, if you look at Buscher's last 6 finishes here, 31st, 22nd, 30th, 26th, 32nd, 17th. So I mean, Buscher really hasn't been that much better himself. I'd be more tempted to take the upside out of what I saw with Preece at New Hampshire. LaJoie, I kind of think we're getting to the end of our usefulness with LaJoie, and it was especially evident last week at Darlington. I don't know how enthused LaJoie is right now, finishing out the season as a lame duck basically, and I don't know if he's really got any prospects about what he's going to be doing next year. Look at LaJoie, what he's done in this package. Average finish of 31st. It's kind of odd that Daniel Suarez actually has a better average finish. He's got an average finish of 23.5. Michael McDowell, he's kind of a scary play for tournaments, but he's got an average finish of 17.5 in this package. Makes him a good tournament pivot. And probably, like, if you're trying to stay away from the punts, McDowell's probably the cheapest guy that you want to have access to.
And let me ask you about the drivers who are at the bare minimum price on FanDuel, $3,000. So that's Yelly, Gase, Davidson, Hill, Sorensen, and Huff. Any of those, let's just say from GPP aspects, do any of them have value in your mind?
I think this week is definitely a week that if you find yourself down in this range, like, don't get heavy on just one guy. Like, you're mix and match, because none of these guys, when you look at what they've done in this tire package or at Richmond, none of them like really excite you. Nobody in the $3,000 range has an average finish better than 34th. So you're talking about maybe a 2-3 place differential ceiling at most, and at a short track like Richmond, these guys could end up 10, 15 laps down or more, and that's really going to hurt you on a site like FanDuel where you're getting points for being on the lead lap. If you're taking a stab, I think you go with Yaley. He just continues to be the best driver, the fastest car out of this lot. And maybe he'll end up with the better finish just because he won't be so many laps down compared to the rest of them.
We got noted in the chat about LaJoie being a lock at 4K on FanDuel to allow you to get those Dominators. Maybe it allows you to get one more Dominator than maybe you could if you had someone say in the 7K range.
Right, but yeah, like if you can't get to Ty Dillon at 4,500 and you are stuck at 4,000 because of the way that you've built your lineup and you don't want to change it, then yeah, LaJoie is a much better play than the Yaley, Gase, Davison, Hill, Sorensen, Houff, Brennan Poole a lot.
Forrest says, Chase looks like the only Hendrick car capable of dominating these days. It's a shame because I know how bad Jimmy wants to win. Number 48 doesn't get the best equipment anymore.
Yeah, it's oddly something that we see is that even in these top tier teams, there's a hierarchy of who gets what. Matt Kenseth, and we didn't bring him up, and probably you don't even need to worry about rostering Matt Kenseth this week. But it is worth noting that if you have access to the race sheets, you're going to look at Matt Kenseth's previous numbers, and you're probably going to scratch your head. Like, yeah, Kenseth somehow, and of course he's only raced here 3 times in the last 3 years, but somehow he's got an average finish of 28.7, but he's averaging 84.3 laps led and 32.3 fastest laps. Those go back his last year at JGR. He was doing really well at Richmond. It was kind of like the one track that he did well at. But the whole point of bringing Kenseth up is because Kenseth and Kyle Busch said in Kenseth last year that kind of Kenseth's team was getting the scraps of what was left over at Joe Gibbs. He was the final car in the pecking order of who got what. So, there's definitely merit to that point. The chase at Hendrick is getting the bulwark of equipment and R&D, and then probably because Bowman and Byron are in the playoffs, it goes to those 2 guys next, and then Jimmy's kind of probably 4th on the list.
By the way, if you do have any questions, hit those up right now in YouTube or on our Slack channel, our NASCAR Slack channel as well. We'll get those questions for you before we get out of here. Mason says this is on DraftKings, Phil. Hamlin, Harvick, or Truex?
We're going Truex, and twice on Saturday night.
Is the fathead going above Tyler Reddick?
He's kind of covering him up this week. Don't tell Tyler. I'm playing the fade game with Harvick. Like, generally, I always play enough cash to cover up my tournaments on DraftKings. I'm not playing any cash tonight. I'm just going 100% tournaments. Whatever happens to my ROI, so be it. I'm fading Harvick. I'm not going to play any Hamlin, and if I remember correctly, I may have gone 100% Truex.
Whoa, 100%. Woo.
Yeah. And maybe 80% Keselowski. I mean, I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head, but I'm definitely taking a balls to the wall approach to the night.
We talked a little bit about Bubba Wallace, but there was another question about him, and it was more a DraftKings question in terms of Bubba Wallace.
Yeah, 7,100 is a bit much for Bubba, but I mean, DraftKings is making you pay for his place differential. So, we mentioned it. Probably his ceiling is somewhere in that 12th to 15th place range, and if he picks up 15 spots, then that's going to be a good day for him in tournaments. But I think he's probably more suited for cash lineups, finishing somewhere in that 20th to 21st range.
This was not really a DFS question related, but Forrest mentioned, he goes, on a side note, I hope Bubba takes over for Jimmy in the 48 next year, assuming they don't retire it. Obviously, I mean, you mentioned about the news of Bubba leaving Richard Petty Racing. Just kind of get your thoughts on what Forrest had to say there.
Right now, we have just nothing but conjecture to go off of, but kind of what my initial feeling is that when Jimmy retires, the 48 is going to either go away, or Alex Bowman is going to get moved from the 88 into the 48, and then the 88 is going to go away. As far as what happens with Bubba, during this time of COVID-19 and the civil unrest and everything else that has been happening in this country, Bubba he's picked up a lot of sponsorship. He's done a fantastic job of putting himself in the I want to say the limelight, but he's basically done an amazing job of presenting himself to people outside of NASCAR, and that has really helped entrenched him as a driver, because if you have sponsorship money behind you, you can basically keep driving until you don't want to drive. So with all of this new money behind Bubba, there's a good chance that we could see him driving the 42 next year for Chip Ganassi. Bubba's already got sponsorship with McDonald's. Ganassi has sponsorship with McDonald's. You combine those two forces together, it keeps McDonald's at Ganassi. That's one of his major sponsors. Like if McDonald's were to leave Ganassi, that would really hurt that team. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be upset at that because they want Ross Chastain to finally get promoted up to the Cup Series and in a competent ride, and that's kind of been the trajectory that we've been looking at. But what does Ross have behind him? He's a aggressive driver that has to be aggressive in order to win races, and when it comes to sponsorship, he's got a watermelon farm.
Yeah, follow the money.
Yeah.
Follow the money. I mean, that's about the best way to put it. Where's the, because I'll tell you, it's just a kind of, someone who just, monitors what's going on with NASCAR with hosting this show. When I saw Bubba Wallace was going to be available, I was like, man, that's going to be kind of interesting to see how that plays out for him. Because I would, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here. As an outsider looking in, I would just seem to think that his negotiating power is going to be in a very good spot to where he's at right now.
Oh yeah. He has so much negotiating power right now that, like, even if it weren't to work out with the 42, well, we could conceivably go over to the 48 because of this sponsorship. And I mean, if you doubt Bubba's ability, don't hold what he's done in the 43 against him. Just think of what we thought about Eric Almirola all those years that he raced for Richard Petty, and then how good Eric became when he moved to Stewart-Haas.
Get some other questions before we get out of here. Bowyer or Almirola on FanDuel?
Man, that's a toss-up because they're only $300 apart on FanDuel. I'm going to say go with Bowyer, and it is definitely narrative-y, but Bowyer had the same issue that Kyle Busch did at the end of last week, where he had 2 loose lug nuts. He's missing his crew chief, but the guy filling in for him is Greg Zipadelli. Greg Zipadelli was the crew chief for Tony Stewart when he won all of his championships. He is a masterful technician. I mean, he is so good when he is calling a race, and with that in Bowyer's in his ear, making decisions for him on pit road. I mean, I think that it increases the chances that Bowyer could end up 5th, 4th, maybe even 3rd.
Yeah. Of course, if you do have any other questions, be sure to hit those right now in the YouTube chat or in Slack as well. Got both those up here. Coming up in front of me. In terms of some other drivers, I think I just want to go over maybe some ones that we really haven't mentioned much at all. Did we mention much about Cole Custer?
No, Cole's kind of he's in a weird spot. Like, I don't have him listed as either a tournament or a cash play. Once again, rookie race at Richmond in the Cup Series. I can't really project Cole to move into the top 10, much less finish there. I think it's going to be a lot like Darlington last week, where it's just going to be start of the race, and all of those guys that are better drivers are going to initially pass him, and he's going to just kind of get stuck hanging around in probably in the 15th to 20th position. Now, the thing working for Custer is, like, if he gets all of that behind him and he's in his game, Custer did really well at both Phoenix and New Hampshire. I mean, top 10s in both races, and that was only with starting 15th. So, you could definitely make the case for some shares of Custer. Like, if you're not going to play Di Benedetto or Christopher Bell, so much that you could pivot to Custer and play him in tournaments. I don't have him listed as a tournament play for myself, but if you guys wanted to, I definitely can see that.
Forrest says, do you like Ryan Newman this week?
Oh, Newman. Newman, you look at his track history. I mean, it's pretty good, and it's probably the best of all of these guys down here. reverse order, 5th, 9th, 15th, 37th, so be it, but then 3rd and 7th. So we're talking about 4 top 10 finishes out of Newman. Those 2 finishes last year came for Roush Fenway. So, in this equipment, he's done pretty well. You go to what he's done in this package. We've only got 1 race to look at because he missed the Phoenix race because, he nearly died at Daytona. But when you look at New Hampshire, he finished 21st. So Newman's, he's probably safe, but God, his floor could literally be finishing 30th. I think probably if you have interest in Newman, you're better off just moving up to Bubba.
Next up, Dave says, what do you think is better, Kozlowski and Truex or Kozlowski and Kyle?
Yeah, Kez and Truex. I've made the case why you should fade Kyle earlier in the video, and I just can't with Busch this week.
Matthew says, he goes, I'm not sure on Kyle this week. Looked average last night and just didn't seem confident in his post-race interview.
Yeah, Kyle raced in the Xfinity Series race last night, and he should have ran away with that race, but had a poor night, was in a piss poor attitude after the race. So, maybe that's given him some motivation, but I think he's just down on this weekend. One, because of what 2020 has been to him, but also because he's missing his crew chief, Adam Alexander.
Yeah, it's always tough when you're talking about athletes and getting their comments right after a performance that they're not happy with. Because, and I can just tell you this from interviewing fighters all the time. And like, I'll give you an example of this. Hunter Azure, who got a decision win 2 weeks ago. And right after the fight's over, he's doing the interview right backstage. I mean, literally, 5 minutes after he wins the fight. And, he's talking about how, he's just upset with his performance, happy he got the win. But then I talked to him about 4 days later, and he's like, man, I had a chance to go back and watch the fight. And I did a lot better than I thought. And so it's kind of this weird dynamic. So I don't put a ton into that just because it's the heat of the moment type thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And Kyle's expectation every time that he suits up for a truck or Xfinity race is that he's going to win and he's going to dominate the race. So when those two expectations don't meet, you should expect to see Kyle in a horrible attitude.
That's the mentality you want, though. I mean, that's the whole thing is like your mentality is going to be, no matter whether you're starting first or last, you got to have that mentality of, I'm the best damn driver out there and I'm going to win this race.
Right. Yeah.
There's no other way I can put it. That's at least that's the way I look at it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like when I hear someone say, oh, a driver's got an ego. Of course he does. Everyone has an ego.
Yeah, you probably don't get to this stage without having one.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. Coming from radio, I'm going to tell you this right now. You walk to a radio station, there is not one person in there that doesn't have a huge ego. I'm telling you, straight up. I had a boss one time, he goes, look, as long as you can check the ego and they can fit through a door frame, we can work. But that's the way I look at it. Matthew asked about, is Harvick a must play? Obviously, you've made your point of why you personally don't like him in this spot.
Yeah, I think playing the ownership, playing what he's done at these day into night races, and then plus, we didn't even bring this up. We have 2 races in our past 6 race data set where Harvick has been on the pole. In fact, we can go back further, and Harvick has not been a legitimate dominator. The spring 2019 race, he started on the pole. He only led 31 laps, had 50 fastest laps. Now, he finished 4th, but that definitely did not meet expectation for him. You go to the fall 2018 race, he started on the pole, led 40 laps, had 34 fastest laps. He finished 2nd. Yeah, he got you a high finish, but those Dominator points definitely did not meet value. You go back to the spring 2016 race. He started on the pole, a little bit better, 63 fastest laps, 63 laps led, 77 fastest laps, and he finished fifth. But once again, he failed to lead, at least 25% or more of this race. And in the last two times that he's been a pole sitter here, he's barely hit the 10% mark, in just one of those races. So we have some past data that says perhaps Harvick's just not suited to start out front at this track.
Yeah, it's and I think that's kind of the thing is if you're going to build your lineup construction around Kevin Harvick because of his price point, what's that going to bring out for your entire roster? That to me is kind of the big question mark.
Yeah, you need so much from him, especially on FanDuel at 14K. You need him to lead so many laps in order to we're kind of looking at our Dominators to hit that 80 to 100 point fantasy point range on DraftKings. You need him to do so much, and because of his price, it affects what you do with the rest of your roster.
I will tell you, I just did dummy crunch. Didn't put anything. Let me just see what it spits out. Kevin Harvick, 100%.
God.
Now, as I mentioned, now what I will do in this case is I've got a dummy crunch. Now this is where I start bringing our ownership projections into it and start changing the exposure to kind of get, and get, especially if you're playing 150 lineups, I think if you're the single lineup player, I mean, and I'm sure based on what we've heard from you today, Martin Truex Jr. would be the guy to, all right, put him in first and then let's build everything else.
Yep.
Who would be number 2 on that list?
I think because of the starting position, I'm going with Logano.
Nick says, what's your favorite punt play?
Okay, if we're just talking in the 6,000 and under range on DraftKings, it's probably McDowell because he saves you money, and we've seen in this tire package that he can easily finish where he started, and at 5,400, I mean that's what I need. Just for him to start and finish around that range, and he'll pay off more than everybody else around him.
Yeah, Matt and Matthew says he mentioned about Harvick saying he is a single entry player, and so I mean that I think that's always what you got to think about is, are you single entry or you multiple entry player? Like you look about Michael McDowell, you mentioned him as a punt play. When you say that, my initial thought is, okay, let me go to ownership. Where is he stacking in ownership, and is he the driver that has the highest salary, highest ownership projection in comparison to salary? And he's not. There are drivers above him that have a similar salary to him that have much higher ownership.
Yep.
And those are things in GPPs you got to look at. You got to figure out exactly what you want to do there. Final thing, Phil. Of course, let everyone know they can follow you on social media, and of course, all the content right now you got up on Awesemo.com for tonight's race.
Yep, got our weekly preview, got the DraftKings FanDuel article, got a SuperDraft article up. Follow me on Twitter at Race Sheets. Hit me up with your questions, especially if you're in the NASCAR Slack chat, and hopefully we can make this a good night, because fully expect the prize pools to continue to decrease as the NFL season goes on.
Yeah, of course, we got a bunch of content today at Awesemo.com. Come up here at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It is on the contrary, as I'll be looking at the NFL slate for tomorrow. Then at 4 o'clock will be another stream going on. That'll be myself and Pete Rogers Jr. for the MMA Live Before Lock show. Also, we got MLB Live Before Lock and NBA Live Before Lock as well. So there's a ton of content today over at Awesemo.com. So that's going to do it for this edition of the NASCAR DFS Strategy Show right here on Awesemo.com.